And welcome to Caring Kind. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eleanor Tornatore-Mikish, President and CEO of Caring Kind, and welcome. This is an exciting evening, one that it's happening in person. I know that there are several people that are also registered online. As of this morning, we had about 370 people register, which is really terrific, which calls to how important this topic is. And I'd like to introduce somebody who's been my mentor and friend. 25 years ago, I started here at Caring Kind as a postgraduate intern. And it was about 2.5 years ago that I proudly came back as their president and CEO. But Jed was here when I first started and continues to be a friend and a mentor, and certainly has served the senior population and those people that are families affected by Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Also very excited about all our other friends that are joining us this evening, particularly Matt, who is a former colleague of mine at the Alzheimer's Association. So thank you for being here. Jed?
Thank you, Eleanor. And can you all hear me in the back without the mic? Okay, good. Welcome. And it is really exciting to see this number of people in person, and as many people are on online for what is, I think, probably our 41st or 42nd annual meeting on research. Kind of lost count, but it's really very it's thrilling. And a couple of reminders and housekeeping. One, we are recording tonight's presentation, so if you have folks who would like to see it, it will be on our YouTube channel, the Caring Kind YouTube channel. You probably didn't know that we have a YouTube channel. We do. And lots of fun things on there. And we'll also be sending it out to people who are requesting it. So we'll be hearing tonight from our distinguished panel about the emerging trends in Alzheimer's disease. And there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you're in the room, you should have gotten an index card and a very special Caring Kind pen. And so we'll be collecting those questions in about 45 or 50 minutes. And if you're online, you can put your questions in the chat room. So I have staff member Meredith Wong, who will be monitoring those questions, and we'll be vetting those questions as well. So at about 7, we'll probably go into the Q&A. And then at 7:30, we'll conclude, and Dr. Noble will be signing his books in the lobby. We'll also have a reception. You're all welcome to join us, and those of you online will have to, provide your own prosecco and cheese and crackers. We'll see how that goes. So let me preface this by saying that, in the past 4 decades that we've done this, there's been so much excitement about research and so much promise about research, but there's also been tremendous disappointment. And so I think finding the balance, and I think we are at a point in time when there is tremendous promise, and there's so much excitement about both what we are learning now about really understanding what are the risk factors, what we can do about reducing the risk for cognitive decline. I hesitate to use the term prevent Alzheimer's. I'm not quite sure that we're there yet. I'm a little more conservative in that way anyway. And we're learning more about how this applies to public health practices and what we can do as a community and as a society to really make sure that as we grow older, we can grow older with healthy brains. And I think we're also, seeing some reaping the fruits of some of that work now, at least in the developed countries in the world. So we're seeing the prevalence of Alzheimer's actually reducing in some Western countries, which is very exciting. But the incidence is still very high. So the actual number of people who get the disease is still very high. But really, until we have a widely accessible disease-modifying drug, and that's really the gold standard that we're looking for, the best care, best treatment is really good care. And that's what we've specialized in here at Caring Kind, for over 40 years. both for the person who's been diagnosed and for their family members and for the professional caregivers. And that you'll be hearing of some tonight about some new initiatives and some exciting work that we're doing here that Stephanie Shivers is leading. And I just want to, I don't know if anyone is new to Caring Kind. And if you are, I encourage you to take a look at our resource table out there. You can always call the helpline at 646-744-2900 or speak to any of the staff members here about the programs that are available. I think in many ways, Caring Kind is kind of like the best kept secret. And people always tell us when they call the helpline, gee, I wish I had called 5 years ago. I wish I knew you were around. So in a disease where medically and pharmacologically we're very limited, I think it's safe to say in terms of what we can do, we know so much more about caring for the person with dementia to improve their quality of life and also to help that caregiver go through this process and keep themselves intact. So we have a lot of material to discuss. I was saying earlier that I could do an hour and a half with each of these speakers, including Sarah online there. Sarah Lenslop will be joining us from Washington, D.C. remotely. But let me introduce our speakers first. I'm going to do a very brief introduction. So Sarah Lenslop is Senior VP for Policy in AARP's Policy, Research, and International Affairs, where she helps position AARP as a thought leader addressing the major issues facing older Americans. She leads AARP's policy initiatives on brain health and care for people living with dementia, including serving as the executive director of the Global Council on Brain Health, which brings her here tonight. And that is an independent collaborative of scientists, doctors, and policy experts convened by AARP to provide trusted information on brain health. So we'll be hearing from Sarah in just a moment. And Matt Baumgart is Vice President of Health Policy at the Alzheimer's Association, leading a range of projects at the intersection of policy and program to achieve an aggressive agenda that serves all those affected by the disease. In this role, he leads the Bold Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Risk Reduction. That's a lot of words, funded by the CDC, and that's what you'll be talking about tonight. Prior to joining the association in 2009, Matt spent nearly 20 years working in the US Senate in a variety of roles, including legislative director for Senator Barbara Boxer and, which I didn't know, legislative assistant for over a decade to then Senator Joseph R. Biden. That's very exciting. Jamie Noble is Associate Professor of Neurology at the Taub Institute and the Gertrude H. Szarjewski Center at the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. He primarily sees patients with dementia, but is also involved in multidisciplinary clinical and research efforts to support patients with persistent post-concussive symptoms. He is fluent in Spanish, which I think I forgot, but I'm glad to know. And his comprehensive approach to care views the patient within the entire family dynamic, with particular focus on disadvantaged communities. He is the co-editor of the 14th edition of Merit's Neurology, a standard global neurology textbook, and the author of Navigating Life with Dementia, a handbook for dementia caregivers. And we'll be talking about that, and he'll be selling that and signing that later on today. Dr. Noble co-founded Arts and Minds, a nonprofit organization promoting well-being for dementia patients and their caregivers via art-centered experiences. Arts and Minds is a partner organization of Art Connect to Culture here at Caring Kind. And we're delighted to have you here with us. And lastly, Stephanie Shivers is the Chief Innovation Officer here at Caring Kind, where she leads the development and implementation of new programs and services. She has over 30 years diverse professional experience in nonprofit leadership and administration spanning multiple sectors. Her clinical experience is as an occupational therapist, which I think really helps inform her work, and she specializes in cognitive dysfunction and rehab. Also, that her clinical experience uniquely positions her to maximize the abilities of those affected by dementia. She, for the past 15 years, she's been launching new programs for individuals with dementia, their family and professional care partners, and for local communities through dementia-friendly initiatives. So her experience in program development, operations, and clinical practice catalyze her capacity to translate evidence-based interventions into real-world practice, which she brings here to Caring Kind. So I'm going to ask Sarah to get ready and to tell us a little bit about what is the Global Council on Brain Health. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled to be sharing Caring Kind's 40th annual research or 41st research meeting with emerging trends in Alzheimer's disease. And I think it's fitting that we're talking about risk reduction. And I'm going to give a little slice about the global update. I think you're asking me to address the global update because I lead the GCBH, and the Global Council you mentioned is an independent collaborative of ARP. We set this organization up to address issues that older adults told us were foremost in their mind. And I can say that we've been the great beneficiary of collaborators over the years since we started 7 years ago. Matthew Baumgart is one of my dearest liaisons who has been with us since the founding of the Global Council. We want to make sure that issue experts and recommendations coming out of our experts from around the world actually make sense from a policy perspective and are integrated with what advocates are talking about. So when we're giving advice about memory, perception, and judgment, we want to make sure that we're adding value to the advocates in the space, to the caregivers, and to the people living with dementia. So the idea is to bring voices together and really talk about a consensus about where the state of the science is. So that's how I would describe the Global Council. We are a great collection of people of like minds trying to share the best information we have currently out there. So I'm just wondering, are you going to do a couple of questions for everybody, or you want me to launch into my opening remarks?
If you launch into the opening remarks, that would be fine.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen, see how it goes. Okay, share. Okay, are you seeing the right slide? Yes. Okay, so I wanted to give folks an update. Go ahead. Okay, why ARP? Why is ARP interested in this? Actually, it's because brain health is essential to our central mission, which is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Cognitive decline is something that really prevents people from choosing how they live as they age. And the disease is seen as the ultimate preventer of that. But ARP is thinking about these issues, as many of you probably do, in three buckets. Risk reduction, which is the prevention, and we're focused on tonight, and that's what I'm going to be talking most about. Optimizing opportunities for people living with dementia and their caregivers. And of course, as you've said, Caring Kind's forte, and we work on projects with you together related to that. And then finally, to spark hope for the future, because we need improvements in all three if we're really going to have a lifetime of healthier brains, which is what everybody wants. But because you asked me to speak about the global update, I wanted to give folks a concept of the World Health Organization's approach when it comes to brain health, because this shows you how far we have come in a very short period of time when it comes to the issues around risk reduction. In 2019, just a few years before COVID, I know it seems like a lifetime ago since that has happened, but really it's only just several years ago when the World Health Organization focused on this topic to issue guidelines on risk reduction, citing the urgency of 50 million people living with dementia, and it's set to triple by 2050. I know you all know these statistics very well, but the global action is actually trying to get something done by 2025, which really seems like it's right around the corner. They have an entire Area Action 3 devoted to risk reduction. And this year, in the position paper, Optimizing Brain Health Across the Life course, what we've come to think about is cognitive issues, brain health. The disease is really a continuum. Brain health starts in utero and follows you all the way to the end of life. And so the World Health Organization is really beginning to see brain health not just as a disease, but in this most recent paper, they're thinking about dementia and Alzheimer's disease as part of a broader set of neurological disorders and focusing the goals on their action plan on epilepsy and other neurological disorders, giving a timeline of 2031, because neurological disorders, when you take them together, are the leading cause of death across the world, responsible for 9 million deaths annually. So for the World Health Organization to begin to focus and include dementia in this, in addition to the traditional issues like non-communicable diseases and early childhood education and the things that set you up early on in your life for the trajectory of what your brain life will be. They are addressing brain health as a framework for understanding at different stages of life. And really, the world has started to take on the idea of reducing the prevalence and the burden of brain diseases so that they can help improve the mental and physical health, no matter what age you are, and to promote the social and economic benefits that come with it. Now, I don't need to go too far into the statistics, except to say that given the costs, which are projected to go from 1.3 trillion in the world to 2.8 trillion just by 2030, the fact that member states of the World Health Organization, only 26 countries in the world have a dementia plan, something has got to give, and the World Health Organization is recognizing it. We know that the economic impact is tremendous and getting bigger all the time. 257 billion in the United States and 800 billion worldwide. This is a problem in search of solutions, and we need to address it urgently.
What we're seeing the next slide as well. Can you go to a screen where we can just see the current slide?
We're seeing your presenter view, Sarah.
Yeah.
Ah, got it. Thank you.
Slideshow.
Yeah.
Down, one down.
Slideshow. That should do it.
Not presenter, the next one.
No, go to the next one down.
Are you seeing the slideshow? Or are you seeing this? The
Go to the
You didn't
third.
click it.
You didn't.
You
click
might
it.
want to,
Go down one on display settings.
how's that?
No,
No,
down.
go down to
duplicate.
duplicate slideshow.
I'm hearing multiple voices telling me things. Is it right or is it wrong?
Wrong.
It's still the presenter slide view. We can go with this, you know. Okay.
Are you seeing one slide now?
No, seeing the presenters.
Is she pressing in? It just seems like she's going into it, but she's not pressing. No, not there. Up display settings.
Go to display settings and go down to
Press down.
duplicate slideshow underneath.
She's not pressing into it.
No, okay, you know what?
Can't
Let's
hear
go
you.
with it. In the interest of time, let's just go with it, Sarah, you're fine.
Well, it was so odd. I'm going to try to.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you
lost it
are.
totally.
I just lost the slideshow,
You lost the slideshow altogether.
lost the screen sharing.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
so that-
try this. One slide now or two?
None.
None.
Okay.
How's that?
Here.
Nope.
Nope.
No,
We still just have you.
Hit screen share.
hit screen share, share screen at the bottom.
Share screen, the green button,
The green.
the green.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that at all.
Share, it's at the bottom or the top of your,
She's not on the
it's in the middle and either the top
task
or
bar.
the bottom. It's not
She's on-
necessarily the bottom for her.
Yeah.
Do you see a picture of a runner?
Yes.
Yes.
But X out of the other.
Xed out, yeah.
There.
Okay, well, I think we're getting it here.
Sarah, do you want me to just share screen? I have your.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, just do that.
There you go.
I think I finally got
You're
it.
good, you're good, you're good. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry.
Here's the point. Half of adults think they're going to get dementia. The numbers are actually much lower. When people think and are so afraid that they are likely to get dementia, there's a certain fatalism that exists in whether or not they can actually do something about it. So our global council has 200 brain health experts from all over the world in many different academic centers. And when we first began the council, we were concerned that would we ever get to consensus? Is there such disagreement that we wouldn't be able to present clear recommendations to people? Well, it turns out that there's probably a lot more agreement around these issues than disagreement about what the state of the science is. So available all around the world, the Global Council on Brain Health has 13 reports on issues that older adults have told us they are interested in. Each of the 25-page reports are distilled into one-page infographics so that they are available in English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and French now, so that we can share the top line recommendations that our experts from all across the globe have concluded. You can learn more about all of this at the Global Council on BrainHealth.org. Each of the individual reports and our latest breaking news is available in our e-newsletter. So ultimately, we were trying to answer what works and what doesn't. And you can see from this drawing that we've looked at a lot of different topics that older adults thought that they were interested in. But these issues in and of themselves are not the answer to risk reduction. It's really about a holistic lifestyle and approaching it through a variety of behaviors that you're going to get to what the Lancet report has indicated, that people can reduce their risk for cognitive decline at the population level by up to 40%. And that a lot of these lifestyle interventions, even if they can't prevent dementia, may be able to delay onset of 5 years. And if we could do that at the population level, we can cut the incidence in half. And those hideous numbers that we heard from a societal point of view could be halved. So we know that the brain and its health is important to people. And most people think it is important. But despite this knowledge, only about half are doing the most important activities to support brain health, like exercising and eating a good diet. So those numbers are probably even inflated. Frankly, people are always in the business of overestimating how much they exercise and how well they eat.
That's true. Yeah.
So the key, now that we've identified what are the actions that people need to take, how are we going to actually sustain it? Because as people always say, behavior change is hard. So we took a similar approach where we got experts about how one can sustain brain healthy behaviors and asked them, what are we going to do? And the important answer here is it's not just an individual answer. Yes, it's absolutely critical that individuals, members of societies, their friends and their families take actions around what I'm going to try to summarize in very short order. But it's not just a question of tell people to do healthy living and everything will be fine. What we have to do is we have to change the paradigm so that communities are making it easier for individuals to implement these things, and that policymakers are creating the systemic changes that are necessary in our environment, in our employment, in our healthcare system, so that it's easy to do what is good for our brain and reduce the harmful ways of living and being that harm our brain health. So we need three foundational elements: knowledge, what works, motivation, what is going to get people to do the activities that would be beneficial to them. And finally, if they're not confident it'll make a difference, then why should they do it? So our experts surprised us, and it wasn't just a question of just do it, but really, how do we create systems so that it's easier for people to do? So the first thing I said was that you had to have knowledge. And yeah.
I ask you to wrap up quickly, and then we'll move on. We'll have an opportunity to talk about some of these 6 pillars perhaps a little bit later on.
Terrific. So I think you have this as a handout available to you. So we could talk about what each of them are, but the 4 steps to get started is something that I wanted to emphasize. The most important thing is to set a goal, find something that's fun. So if you hate kale, don't choose, I'm going to start eating my leafy green vegetables and shoving kale down your face, because it's not going to be sustainable for you. So the important thing is to set a goal and action you want to take, find something that you will enjoy and that you can keep going. And people always say they don't have enough time to do it. Well, we could talk a little bit about that, but making room for new healthy habits is possible when you take a look at your life and start actually taking steps towards it. And finally, besides not knowing what works, the other barrier that most people report is that no one around them does these kinds of behaviors. So if no one around you is doing it, it makes it much tougher for you. I'm going to race through the rest of my slides. I can make them all available to you, but the thing that I'd like to take away, for you to take away, if you're looking for resources about any of the things that I've talked about, whether it's dementia or prevention or cure, you can find all of these things at arp.org/brain health. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. A lot of information. But I'm going to do next slide. Thank you. Let me ask my friend Matthew, what is the Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Risk Reduction, and how does it coordinate with what's happening? This is a national project. How does that coordinate or reflect what's happening locally as well?
Sure. Thank you, Jed. Thank you for having me. Really pleasure to be here. Are you just going to advance the slides, or did you want me
Yes,
to?
you can do it.
Okay. So you'll notice, Jed, that the name of this is the Public Health Center of Excellence on Dementia Risk Reduction. It is not on dementia prevention.
Right.
So I agree with you that we're not quite there yet to call it prevention. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a difference when we start talking about the level of evidence on what you can say at an individual level versus what you can say at a population level. And that's really key to what the BOLD Center is about. The BOLD Center is about what can public health do? What can we do at a population level to address risk reduction? So just a little bit of background for those of you who it's not advanced. Do you want to just click?
Oh, sure.
For those of you who are not familiar with BOLD, BOLD is actually an acronym that stands for Building Our Largest Infrastructure, BOLD, for Alzheimer's Act. That passed Congress in 2018, signed into law on New Year's Eve. That was our New Year's gift. And it really looks to take a public health approach and to build a public health infrastructure around addressing cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, and dementia caregiving. You know, for 40 plus years, we've really looked at Alzheimer's as an aging issue. It's something, it's old people. It's like when you deal with it when you get old, and that's what the aging community is for. We tried to start changing that back in 2005. The CDC has a program called the Healthy Brain Initiative. And we at the Alzheimer's Association have worked with the CDC since 2005 on that to start increasing the knowledge and understanding of Alzheimer's from a public health perspective rather than an aging perspective. It took us a long time to convince public health people that this was a public health issue. But even when they started to see it as a public health issue, the problem then became there was no infrastructure. There was very little knowledge within the public health community about cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, and there was no money to build what was necessary if you're going to do something about it from a public health perspective. So that's really where the BOLD Act came in. It said we need to start building that infrastructure in public health to address Alzheimer's. So this law has three major components, going right to left. It increases data analysis and timely action on a timely reporting of that data. Data is key to being able to figure out from a population level what to do. It provides funding to public health departments around the country to actually begin to build that infrastructure. There's 20 states, 1 city, 1 county, and 1 Indian tribal health board that are currently receiving grants from the CDC. We expect in mid-December for CDC to issue another call for proposals, and the funding could jump to as many as 40. So we're really excited about what this funding is able to do in helping public health agencies actually build that infrastructure and act in their communities. And then it establishes centers of excellence. And this is really to help those, not only those who are getting the grants from the public health departments get grants, but those who are not getting grants. What are the things that we should be doing? You know, you build an infrastructure, you build knowledge, you have money to act, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to, or we should, or it's a best use of our money to have every public health department reinvent the wheel. And so these centers of excellence were created to kind of build, what does the science say? What is the evidence? What is the tools, resources, best practices for acting in the community? And so CDC awarded 3 public health centers of excellence, 1 on early detection and diagnosis, which is right here in New York at NYU, 1 on dementia caregiving, which is at the University of Minnesota, and 1 on dementia risk reduction, which is at the Alzheimer's Association. Next slide. So the centers of excellence, again, are designed not to actually go out into the community and do things, but to give public health the tools and resources to empower them, to enable them to go out in their local communities and act, whether that's at the state level, the local level, or the tribal level. Next. So this schematic here is the schematic for the Risk Reduction Center. All 3 centers have the same ultimate aim and purpose, but we all each approach it differently relative to what our particular issue and area of focus is. So the Center of Excellence, you know, first thing we need to do is understand the science. There's a lot, Sarah talked a lot about that with the Global Council on Brain Health. And in understanding that science, we have a research roundtable, Wake Forest University School of Medicine, is our academic and scientific partner on this. They convened the roundtable. Last year, they reviewed all of the evidence, the reviews, like all the stuff that the Global Council on Brain Health did on modifiable risk factors. This past year, they have been looking at what social determinants of health increase risk for dementia, as well as act as barriers to addressing the modifiable risk factors. Once we understand the science, we then hold a public health roundtable. We do that annually to identify what can be done. So it's one thing to know what the science says. It's another to know what public health can do about it. So we identify what can be done. We then build the tools for public health. So we're building toolkits on how public health can address the various risk factors. We have published. We published. No, I think I'm fine. We published summaries of the state of the evidence and, most importantly, the public health implications of that evidence. We published that on 11 different risk factors. We also published a report for those who are writing or updating a state or local Alzheimer's plan on what you can include or in that plan, the options you can include on risk reduction when you're putting together a strategy to move forward on addressing Alzheimer's and dementia. And then lastly, we really want to drive public health action. So we're in the process of finalizing fact sheets and heat maps so that states can see what's the biggest risk factors in our state, where within our state are the hot spots that we need to address. We also do a thing called community convenings, because we recognize that smaller public health departments, if you're not a state public health department or a very large local public health department like we have here in New York City, you don't have a lot of resources. And so what we do is we have this program called community convening, because one of the things that public health does and has as their function is to convene the stakeholders of a community. And so we utilize that role by going to medium and smaller public health departments. We were just last week in Moore County, Kentucky, or Moore County, Tennessee, I'm sorry. You don't need to know where it is. The only thing you need to know about is that's where they make Jack Daniels. That's not why we chose the county. Interestingly, though, it is a dry county. The only place it is legal to sell alcohol is in the gift shop of the Jack Daniels distillery. So we work with these really smaller, medium-sized communities, and we say to the public health department, just convene the stakeholders, convene the community together, and we'll help you walk through with the stakeholders and have them decide what actions need to be taken. So it's not all on the public health department, but we're still getting action in those communities. So that's an example of one way we're driving public health action. So that's kind of the various different things that we do at the Risk Reduction Center of Excellence to drive that action. I want to close here by saying, all of this we're doing, this is what we're doing, and Congress has invested this money, and CDC has funded public health departments, and they're funding these centers. And why? And when it comes to risk reduction, I want to close with the why, because I think it's really important to understand. We all intuitively say, oh yeah, let's reduce the risk, right? But it's a bigger problem than we think, or that we often think. There's an old saying, you've heard this long before I did, because you've been in this business a lot longer than I have. It's an old saying, if you have a brain, you're at risk. And there is some truth to that. But there's also truth to the fact that there are other things you can do to make it even more risky or elevate your risk. So Sarah mentioned, the trajectory we're headed in. The projections are 2060, there'll be 13.8 million, nearly 14 million Americans living with Alzheimer's disease. And we can change the curve. For a long time, the focus has been to change that curve on getting treatments. And that is vitally important. And I think there are starting to be some things that you're going to see in the next couple of years, maybe even as early as the next couple of months, on that front. But there's another way to address bending that curve that we're on, and that's risk reduction. If you go to the next slide. So what is up here are 6 risk factors that have some of the strongest evidence. You can't see it in the back, so I'll read the little type in the back. So the first 2 are midlife hypertension and midlife obesity. This is the prevalence in the state of New York for those between 45 and 64. So that is 40% of people in New York State between the ages of 45 and 64 have hypertension. Now, the studies aren't strictly limiting you to 45 to 64. The evidence is that hypertension is a risk factor when you're middle-aged. 45 to 64 is what the World Health Organization defines as middle-aged. I remember several years ago, a couple of decades ago now, when my brother was in his mid-30s, he got into an argument because my mom called him middle-aged. And my brother took great offense at that. He did not know that he could have whipped out the World Health Organization and said, you're not middle-aged till you're 40. It wouldn't have mattered though, because nobody wins an argument with my mother, so it would not have mattered. But 45 to 64. So there you can see 35% of New Yorkers between 45 and 64 are obese. Smoking is this is the rate for those who are 45 and over, and you can see almost 1 in 8. Diabetes, physical inactivity. This goes to something that Sarah said, people don't exercise as much as they think. This is actually the percent of the population who does not meet physical activity guidelines. So this squarely fits with what Sarah was talking about. People who say they exercise, but probably are not exercising enough, because half of New York adults, and that's all adults 18 and over, do not meet physical activity guidelines. And the last one is sleep. And I'll say this about the evidence. The evidence is that poor sleep is not good for your brain health and is a risk factor for cognitive decline and possibly dementia. It's still not quite clear what aspect of sleep is the biggest problem. Is it the number of hours you get? As I see a couple of people in the audience yawn. Is it the quality of the sleep you're getting, or is it sleep disturbances? But when you look at when you go to databases, it's really hard to get anything other than average number of hours of sleep. So this is just a proxy, but 1 in 10 New Yorkers get less on average than 6 hours a night. Next. So if you put these 5 together, leave sleep off because of those issues. If you put these 5 together, 69% of all adults in the state of New York have at least one of these 5 things. And you can see it's much higher for Black New Yorkers and Hispanic New Yorkers. 77% of Black adults and 73% of Hispanic adults have at least one of these 5. This is 5 risk factors. They're risk factors with some of the strongest evidence, but it's only 5. The Alzheimer's Association does an international conference every year, a science conference, AAIC. 2 years ago, summer before last, an abstract was submitted to the conference, and that abstract said, we went through the literature, we searched all the literature, and we found that there had been published studies, these are in peer-reviewed scientific journals, published studies on 364 different risk factors. Now, some of those turned out not to be. The study said, no evidence. A lot of them, it's weak. And I'm not suggesting there are actually 364 things. But what I am saying is these are 5 of the strongest, but they're not necessarily the only 5. There are other things, diet, which you heard Sarah mention, cognitive engagement, depressions, social engagement. But you can see you've got a huge portion of the population that doesn't just have a brain to put them at risk, but has an additional, at least one risk factor to put them at risk. And that makes this incredibly important, because even if we have a treatment, even if we have an effective treatment, once somebody has Alzheimer's, wouldn't it be better to avoid having to have that treatment by reducing risk anyway? You know, well over 60% of people with cancer now survive cancer. But we're still trying to prevent cancer in the first place. And that's really important to keep in mind and that's why this is so important.
Thank you, thank you. Caring Kind has actually just published a guide for healthy sleep. For caregivers, because you know, the caregivers were at greater risk for not sleeping well, because often there's sleep disturbances. And so you can find that online, and so, but it's certainly something that we've been very engaged with. Dr. Noble, Jamie. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
So how does all of this apply from your kind of clinical and clinicians' perspective? You people coming into your office, I'm interested in how all of this applies, if it does, to people who are already diagnosed with the disease. We're not preventing it, but can we slow down the progression using some of these behaviors? And then I want to talk to you about kind of what's in the pipeline in terms of treatments. So
Yeah,
take it away.
thanks, Jed, and thanks, Matt, for teeing it up for me. I've actually published on these health disparities and what we can do about modifiable risk factors. And there's a second figure that goes along with prevalence. And that's the relative risk. When you combine those two, you come up with what's called a population attributable risk factor. That is, if you had a magic wand and you could take that risk factor out of the population, what would its absolute impact be in the total number of cases that you could reduce? Not only can you determine that, but if you could make if you didn't have that magic wand, but you could make those risk factors equivalently prevalent across all groups, you would actually eliminate substantially a lot of the healthcare disparities that we see, especially in dementia prevalence. It wouldn't eliminate everything, but it would certainly bring it down to a lower level. So it's I completely agree that risk factor reduction is the mainstay of prevention. But in my practice, I see patients with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. A lot of my public health work, however, is focused on education and prevention. We'll get to that in a minute too. So from a clinician's perspective, all day today, I saw patients with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. I think I saw 10 families affected by it, each one with a different story, a different need, a different stage. Let's see, what's this one? Oops, oh, it did advance. Oh, I lost my slide. There we go. Okay, so all right, so we'll start with this. Does anybody recognize this one on the left? A couple of nods in the back. Those who haven't seen my talk before. Who is that?
August Dieter.
August Dieter. That's right. So thanks to German HIPAA laws in the early 1900s, we now know that she is the actual case index that Dr. Alzheimer himself described. He took that photograph in roughly 1901. She died in 1906, and in 1911 he published these hand drawings of her neuropathology that he saw under the microscope. He worked with many other physicians, but he's the one who's credited with the eponymous disease. And along the way, we know that her history is very much like what I take in the office. We solicit a history from families and caregivers and the patients themselves. I think about, okay, what's their history? What's the context? What's their path towards getting here? And I ask all these questions based on the knowledge that I have as a specialist. And then I translate that into saying, okay, well, I'm going to do a couple of tests to exclude common causes, reversible causes, but more and more we're able to identify what are called biomarker-based classifications of disease. And it really began as an objective tool towards understanding the pathobiology of disease, but it's become a diagnostic tool for us. And it starts really with things like brain imaging. And this is a summary image from an article probably 10 years ago now in neurology. And you can see the areas in red, which are the medial temporal lobe. Those are the areas that are inundated with Alzheimer's disease in most individuals. Whereas the blue regions are the ones that are affected a little bit later. And these are areas that begin to get to shrink over time. And to give you a sense, this is a composite of hundreds of individuals who have had changes over time. And yet we're still calling this August disease. As much as we call it Alzheimer's disease, it's actually August disease. But I think this is a cardinal error that we've made in the field for over 100 years, that we're calling this all one disease. It's not, it's multiple different diseases. We've gotten better at being able to diagnose the disease using PET imaging, where we can now identify in a living individual the neurobiology of Alzheimer's disease in ways that we could only previously do this through neuropathology after death studies. And ultimately, of course, these are great, but we do need to get to treatment. Ultimately, it's where we want to go. So, okay, we all know who August is. We all know what this is, right? The moon. Anybody who's ever looked outside at the moon at night has thought about what? Going there, right?
Yeah.
What would it like to be on the moon?
That's why you're the.
What's the relevance? What's the relevance there? It's a moonshot. We keep hearing about these moonshots. Well, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking, okay, well, in 1902, the year after August was diagnosed, The Journey to the Moon, a classic movie, was created, a French film. So we've been thinking about going to the moon as long as there have been movies, and as long as there's been science fiction made since the 1950s. But it actually took us until 1969 to get there, and it was 1972 was the last time we were there. But just this week, the Artemis rocket launched, and now we're going back to the moon. Not landing on the moon, but we're going to circulate around the moon with crash test dummies loaded, and then they're going to come back to the Earth in about a week from now, right? That's how we're going to get to the moon. But how did we get there in the 1960s? What do we think? It took time, but what else did it take?
Money.
It took money, absolutely. It took a lot of money. So this is a publication, just came out a couple of months ago from the Office of the Inspector General from NASA. And they said, okay, what does it take to get to the moon? Well, if you look at this gray curve, this is something called the National Best Practices Curve, about how much money you're supposed to spend on something to make a big difference. The green line is what was spent on Apollo, and the blue line is what's being spent on the Orion capsule, which is the next capsule to go up to the moon. So you wonder why we keep losing time on this. Well, it comes down to money. But if we look at the history of medical spending and other initiatives, we talk about the cancer moonshot. You don't hear about the HIV moonshot. Why is that? Because they landed on the moon.
Right.
It took 15 years from really the first onset of the epidemic in San Francisco, 15 years before we had disease-modifying therapy, serious disease-modifying therapy for AIDS. And you look at Alzheimer's disease, the inflection point began only in the 2012 when the Eureka grants were first described, the Eureka Act was first described, and that actually proposed that we cure Alzheimer's disease by 2025. So 13 years from its initial onset, even though we knew about the disease for over 100 years. Now, granted, we knew about cancer from the late 1800s, and we knew about smoking and so forth causing cancer from the 1950s and 60s with Hill and his famous papers. Well, let's think about what we've done in the last 22 years. So this really tracks along with my medical training experience. So in 2000, I was doing my major clinical year rotation, and by then, we knew that you could identify brain atrophy on an MRI. You knew that there were functional patterns on functional imaging you could identify, and we had some memory medications. And early research would suggest that we could identify spinal fluid changes for Alzheimer's disease. And we were very good at that point of establishing the signs with the underlying neuropathological brain changes in dementia. In 2002, we had the first human use of amyloid PET was identified in Alzheimer's disease, and FDA approval of memantine before aducanumab last year was the last FDA-approved medication. So that's what I keep hearing, and you'll hear from many people, how come we don't have a new drug? It was 18 years between memantine and aducanumab. Well, here's what we've actually made, and there's huge progress in the field in getting ourselves towards the next stage in treating Alzheimer's disease. 2004, spinal fluid biomarkers became commercially available. We use these all the time in our practice. In 2011, there were first clinical and biomarker-based consensus criteria for Alzheimer's disease. So 7 years after it became commercially available, then it got incorporated into clinical and research, right? First of 3 amyloid PET ligands became approved in 2012. We had new criteria for dementia with Lewy bodies. As much as we talk about Alzheimer's disease, 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's, 1 million Americans have Lewy body disease. Hardly anybody's heard of it when they come to my office. 2020, we had research Alzheimer blood-based biomarkers for phospho-tau made a big breakthrough. There were multiple papers that came out in 2020, and we actually had new criteria for prodromal Lewy body dementia criteria, which is again 9 years behind Alzheimer's disease. We had the first approval of tau PET and the first commercially available test for Alzheimer's called the Precivity AD test. And New York stands alone as being the one state in which you cannot order it yet. It's because of different CLIA certifications. It's coming, but it's not there yet. Much as we talk about football, and Jed mentioned I do a lot of work in concussion, it's really in a bigger thread of modifiable risk factors over the life course. I do a lot of work in periodontal and oral health disease as well. So traumatic encephalopathy syndrome criteria, the aducam story as well, aducanumab, and there's also another blood-based test for called the Alexis amyloid plasma amyloid panel, which actually measures phospho-tau in combination with ApoE, just like with the Precivity, along with an age factor predicts what brain amyloid status is. And of course, you've heard about the lecanemab trial results. I don't know anything more than you do. We'll know a lot more next week. So I just want to also point out that as much as we should brag about how much we've spent at the NIH level, we're now about $4 billion a year that we have the benefit from research. And that was up from $400 million just a year ago. This, less than a month ago, we just celebrated Halloween and we spent $10 billion as Americans on Halloween. So we're actually far behind in Alzheimer's research relative to Halloween spending. So that's about $30 a person is how much we spend on Alzheimer's on Halloween, and about $10 a person per American on Alzheimer's research. So just to put things in perspective, a few less candies and a few more Alzheimer's research dollars, right? So where are we now? When I think about Alzheimer's disease, I think about those model systems. How did cancer, how did HIV make such really transformational discoveries? Well, they thought about a couple of things. Starting now in our field, we are now starting to embrace the complex disease pathways and similar clinical phenotypes of disease. We did not embrace that until just recently. We now are being able to start to transform into using minimally invasive, cost-effective therapies. As much as we get excited about spinal fluid, nobody wants an LP, let's be honest, right? As much as we get excited about PET scans, they're not available except for in highly specialized centers. And even when we get excited about MRIs, they're hardly available anywhere else in the world outside of America or Europe. All right, so transitioning to screening is now possible if we have broad uptake of these blood-based biomarkers. We are not yet, however, able to really clinically or biologically subtype these individuals to identify small segments of small therapeutic treatment responsiveness. And if you look across every other treatment disease, whether it be for any disease, whether it be HIV, cancer, there are tails of responders at the beginning that only are identified once we have many other treatments available, right? We can begin to identify these small segments of early responders. We also know that in every single disease known to man, you have to start early. So it has to start with early identification. And we always, at each stage of treatment, have to strike the benefit, risk to benefit balance, right? Every treatment that we know across every disease is going to be stage specific, right? So aducanumab probably only going to be effective in the very earliest of stages of diseases, maybe not later on. We don't know for sure, but that looks like it's going to be the case. But there may be even earlier strategies that are worthwhile doing, right? And as much as we talk about precision medicine, as a math major, I hate that term. Precision is not what we want. We want precision and accuracy, right? So this is why the personalized medicine term is probably much better. The cluster of arrows that's way off the bullseye, that's precise medicine. That's not what you want, right? And then lastly, as much as we think about our treatments, there's a good indication that we're probably only starting our therapies once there's a so-called malignant transformation of disease. It's as though we're treating HIV once AIDS has started, or as though we're treating cancer once it's metastatic. We need to get to the very beginning of treatment of disease, and that begins with better biomarkers and better understanding of the pathobiology of disease. And what else did Kennedy say about the moonshot in 1962, 60 years ago? What did he say? We're going to get to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard, right? That's why we want to get there. Not easy, it's hard. And it's not going to be easy to get to these therapies. It hasn't been easy, but we're getting closer towards those. So I'll just close. Thank you for promoting the book. It's my first book signing I've ever done. So kind of fun. I'll also share about the educational program. So I have a randomized controlled trial going on right now called Old School Hip Hop. And the treatment groups are actually 4th and 5th graders. So we're actually going into elementary schools and teaching 4th and 5th graders about dementia using old school hip hop. So songs and cartoons. And we should have results of that study out in the spring. So,
Very,
yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You can give that to Stephanie. I have a lot more questions for you, but I do want to get to Stephanie. Because as you know, so we're not at the place where we really have really good treatments yet, and I think they're on the horizon. This lecanemab will be coming out with new data at the end of this month, and it looks promising, but I'm always kind of skeptical until we see it and see what the changes are in terms of where people live and function and how they think. So in the absence of that, you're bringing a whole bunch of new programs. What are the emerging trends in those new programs that you're bringing, and in some sense reviving here at Caring?
Well, it's been a perfect cue up for me because obviously we've got global health, looking at prevention. We've got the BOLD initiative saying that we've got a public health issue here. We're beginning to really push and understand that we need to do early diagnosis. And so if and when we actually have people that are coming forward and will get diagnosed earlier, what happens? What happens with them? And so what's the push? What's the emerging trend to actually create new services and supports for people in the early stages? And for caregivers, for family members, this is the research conference, right? And there's growing information, there are growing services that are what are called evidence-based or evidence-informed. That means that there's research that's been done on those programs that actually show and demonstrate that they have a positive impact. So for our family, spouses, friends, partners who are providing care and support, we're implementing new evidence-based and evidence-informed services here at Caring County.
Before you go on, just want to ask, if Ed, if anybody has any questions, Ed will come along and pick them up, and we'll take a look at those, and then we'll answer those at the end. So,
I finished that. Did you have another question?
okay, I do. So what motivated you to, spend so much time of so many years in terms of introducing new programs and to grow our early stage services here at Caring Kind?
I appreciated what Matthew said about it taking quite an effort to convince the world that this is a public health issue. For me, I think that this field is riddled with social justice issues for people with dementia. Stigma is pervasive. And because of stigma, people are marginalized, they're isolated, they don't get diagnosed. And services aren't available for them that actually are meaningful and provide purposeful living. And so that those social justice issues are really, they're kind of human rights issues and disability rights issues. And that's what kind of really resonates with me. And so trying to create programs that address those issues at the fundamental level are what we're doing here. And I'm happy to share a few of
Yes,
them.
I'd love to.
So I have to give a shout out to, we've got some amazing funding that's made these new services available from the Administration on Community Living. We've got an Alzheimer's disease program initiative project that we're executing right now. Can't see Sarah there, but shout out to Sarah and the Global Council on Brain Health, because we've got some funding to do some pilot work. And we're also partnering on an NIA Impact Collaboratory project for cognitive stimulation therapy, am I hitting the right button?
It should be the right, no?
I'm hitting the right button. Where am I aiming it? It
I
worked for
might be
Jamie.
talking here.
I got it.
That's okay. You got it here. So these are just a spannering of the early stage programs that we have here. You can go to the next slide. So the first program that we're actually launched is called Cognitive Stimulation Therapy. And this program is really about helping people to understand that they can still think. It's really kind of helps people to remember that cognition is more than memory. Whoa, hello.
Sorry.
That's a, it's her, it's not me. So cognition is more than memory. And so this is a 16 sessions here. We've got some of our facilitators in the group here. They're happy to tell you more about that. But this is, it's really a program. It's an evidence-based program. It's been around for about 20 years. It's practiced widely throughout the UK, over 35 countries. And we're happy to be really excited to be launching it here in those in these small groups. Those are virtual. We'll do it in person as soon as we have enough people who want to actually come back and do it in person. And we're doing those in English and Spanish. Next slide. The next program that we're launching is called Journey Together. And this program is really about adjusting to the diagnosis. So it's psychoeducational, it's a support type of a workshop. It's kind of a segue into a traditional type of a support group. It's got, you can see here on the bottom, there are themes each week that the group goes through. And again, that's a virtual small group. And so that's really, people learn about what is dementia, what are they actually experiencing, what is it like to actually live with some of the changes, that how do you connect, how do you connect with your peers and build new relationships, how do relationships change? It gets into addressing grief and loss, a lot of those different topics, which you can't actually see all those here, but Pam Atwood, who's here, is going to be launching that first program, so Pam can actually talk to you more about that. Next slide, Julie, thanks. To whom I may concern, this program is really about, people, the first one, CST, people are learning that they can still think. The journeying together is really about adjusting. To whom I may concern is really about sharing your experience. What's it like to live with dementia? And this program, there's a sharing group that comes together and they actually share it's a facilitated conversation about various experiences that they're going through. And then those stories are shaped into a script, which they then perform in a reader's theater type of performance setting to the invited audience of their choice. So they invite their friends, their families, their physicians to actually hear their live experience. And then there's a talk back that happens with that program. That's called To Whom I May Concern.
We did the very first To Whom I May Concern in 2005
Right.
here.
Yeah,
And it's with the stage reading. It is a very powerful tool, both for the person with dementia and I think for their family caregivers who get to see them in a
absolutely.
very different way.
Absolutely.
And we've used it to educate medical students and nurses and social workers to humanize the experience of dementia.
Right, because it's really kind of, you can see there's a little bit of scaffolding that happens kind of through this. That's intentional, and it's also different people come in and are interested in different things and have different needs, and so we're trying to meet a variety of needs across the continuum. Julie, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. If we zoom out or up to like the 10,000 foot level, and we start to think about the realm of kind of policy making and research. You heard Matthew talking about bringing stakeholders together as a part of the BOLD initiative. Now it's not really just nice to have people with dementia and their care partners at the table. Now it's actually the expectation. And so if that's the expectation, how do we actually, is there a way for us to prepare people to be stakeholders, to build their capacity to be stakeholders? And so that's the dream behind this program, Make It Matter. And so this is really about equipping, it's a training to equip and activate dementia stakeholders to shape policy, to shape research, to shape program development, and ultimately to shape the trajectory of the services that will inform them or will actually impact their lives. And so we also have some programs for family, spouses, partners, caregivers, partnering together. This is the complement of journeying together. So journeying together as a group for people living with dementia that have been relatively newly diagnosed. Partnering together is a 10-session workshop for their spouses, their adult children, whoever is kind of partnering with them with their experience. So this is really about adjusting to life as a partner to someone who's living with this experience. And you can see that the sessions are complementary depending on who the audience is. And then finally, the last one, we have had a long history of social work services here and dementia consultation services here. And so that's now, we call that coaching. We're shifting that into a coaching kind of an umbrella term. And within that one-on-one coaching service, those are individualized, personalized services. We're implementing a program that's called REACH, which is about a 20-year history. It's gone through several iterations. We're doing the Texas version of the REACH 2 iteration, which is a community-based translation project, for those of you who understand what all that terminology means. What does that boil down to? What it boils down to is a relationship between a dementia specialist and a care partner, a family member, again, or family friend, partner, whoever's partnering with the person. And they're meeting really kind of once a month for about 6 months. There are 9 different topics that they go over in those meetings. Again, that depending on what the particular need is of the person. We're offering that in English and Spanish. Again, where the outcomes, the impact of that program has been demonstrated. in multiple ways by, you know, really the leaders in research for dementia care services. So we're very excited to be able to offer that free of charge to the caregivers in our area.
Thank you.
I think
Stephanie.
that's it. Yeah. That's-
And, you know, so this really, expands our horizons of kind of what we offer. And all of our other core programs are still existing, the helpline and social work services and the medical alert wanderer safety program. And support groups are still going strong. So as well as all of our other education programs. So this is really expands our universe and brings us back to where we need to be to help especially that person with dementia in that early stage. And we have we were really pioneers in doing that. So I'm just delighted that this is happening. I have a few questions from our audience here. I'm going to remind people online that if you have any chat, you can put any questions in the chat. And we can do that. I have a question for Sarah. I'm assuming Sarah's still here.
I'm here.
Thank you, Sarah. So a question is that in one of your slides, you identified taking supplements as an action we can take to reduce risk. Can you say more about that? What kind of supplements, and is there any data? Because I think there's a lot of controversy about supplements. So
Save your money, honey.
okay, that says it
So
all.
the Global Council looked at supplements, and what we titled our report is The Real Deal on Brain Health Supplements. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence for many of the claims that this rich industry out there that is pumping out brain health supplements is making money hand over fist, and the results are simply not there to show for it. That's not to say if you have a vitamin B deficiency, you can certainly, if you go to your doctor and identify that you have a deficiency in one of the essential nutrients, it can help your brain health. So I'm not saying, don't look into it. What I am saying is that the 25% of older Americans who purchase brain health supplements and take it for brain health reasons, they are wasting their money. Now, there is a recent study out of Wake Forest that I'm going to take back a little bit of what I've said. They were doing a study to see whether cocoa flavonoids had any beneficial effect in a pill form. And they found out that compared to a placebo, it did not have any beneficial effects. However, they had another arm in the trial and they had a multivitamin. And it seems as if there was some association with adults that take a multivitamin once a day. Now, I think you have to dig deeper into the information and find out what else those people are doing and what else was in their life. But that was one of the most encouraging research projects with respect to multivitamins. But the Global Council spent a lot of time going through each and every one of the most popular supplements. And the big takeaway is it is absolutely essential that you get good nutrients and eat well for brain health. But the evidence that we have that is beneficial about nutrition is food and not the brain health supplements. And that, in fact, there's some brain health supplements that are of great risk because we don't know the content. They are not regulated like prescription drugs. And I highly recommend that you take a look at the report of the Global Council on Brain Health on Supplements. We had really some of the world's greatest experts, including people from the Food and Drug Administration who were helping us on put that report together. So I encourage you to take a look at the real deal on brain health supplements on the Global Council on Brain Health's website for more information about that.
Thank you. Dr. Noble, any comments on supplements? I've heard it said that Americans have the most expensive urine in the entire world. Because, you know, we take so many supplements and we spend a lot of money. It's a multi-billion-dollar
Oh, yeah.
industry and it is not regulated. And as Sarah said, we don't have, you know, there's no evidence and they're supposed to not be making any claims about health. So,
Yeah, I would agree with everything Sarah said. Regarding the multivitamin story, there was a study recently. I can't remember if it was observational or a trial, but it was fairly convincing. I read it at the time when it came out. It was a large study, well designed. The only thing about, suggesting multivitamins is, that's not a big win, unfortunately, because most people already take them.
yeah.
I also want to emphasize that, these recommendations about multivitamins are not just about brain health, but, general health as well.
Let me ask you a question in terms of, for any of you. Just we've learned a lot about the risk reduction kinds of behaviors, the pillars of good brain health in terms of reducing risk. But for people who are already either at MCI or early stage, what is the evidence or what do we speculate is the impact of that?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I get this question asked all the time. And, there's really little downside to recommending kind of the 4 pillars, which is what I focus on, which would be a healthy diet. Often the Mediterranean diet will be something that I suggest people. It's a dietary construct, not individual micronutrients. It would be exercise. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Social engagement and cognitive stimulation, right? Exercise in particular, there's been some new encouraging data coming out to suggest that a moderate amount of regular exercise is actually quite good for the brain. We knew that already for other conditions, for heart disease, for instance. There's good evidence for it in terms of controlling some of Parkinsonian
What does
symptoms.
that mean? A moderate?
Yeah,
amount?
right. So they actually, this is, I have, the last time.
More
I-
than we think.
Yeah, well, no, I would say the last time I ran a mile was for the president in 9th grade, so I'll just say that. But I do enjoy exercising outside and yard work and whatnot. But it was actually quite encouraging in that regard, because you don't have to go and run a sprint for, 45 minutes at a breakneck speed. It was that having a regular amount of mild aerobic exercise seemed to have been just as beneficial as intense aerobic exercise. And I think it was only 2 or 3 days a week that I started to see that benefit. 30 minutes, light aerobic exercise a few times a week. I was just in case you haven't been paying attention, we've been recommending this for years for people. So maybe this is just yet another reason to kind of follow these recommendations. The difference here is that it was in people who were already diagnosed with MCI, and it wasn't just executive MCI. It seemed to have been amnestic or forgetting type as well.
Is there any evidence, and I remember seeing a film called Forks Over Knives, which was a documentary about the benefits of a plant-based diet.
Mhm.
And they showed actually that in many different ways, how avoiding both meat and dairy and really having a vegetarian plant-based diet was really helpful in terms of reducing stroke and reducing cardiovascular disease. They showed that in Norway during the war, when Germany took over all of the farms and all of the livestock, and they could only eat a plant-based diet. The heart disease rate plummeted in Norway, and then after the war, it went right back up again, eating the pork and the beef and all of that. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, be careful what a longevity experts advocate. The longevity experts themselves usually don't live as long as the general population. It's actually true. I would also say that any diet that's really primarily focused on primary ingredients, whether they be plant or protein based, generally speaking, are going to be more helpful than ones that are steeped in highly processed foods, ultra processed foods. To your point about, I don't remember if it was Finland or Norway was the one where after a famine, it was required that every family own a cow. And it was for years the case that that country had the highest mortality and morbidity related to cardiovascular and cerebrovascular health. And it was because butter was the primary shortening in all foods there. And once that actually was rescinded from federal law, then the numbers went back down to regular levels. And so that there are many examples you can point to and say, well, there's one relationship and another. I wouldn't say it's necessarily you have to, have a vegan diet, because actually there are some risks associated with vegan diets. But it was really just a diet that's consistently has central tenets of primary ingredients as much as can be, rather than secondary ingredients, and ones that are well balanced and not excessive in caloric intensity or density. people don't lose weight by going on fattest diets. They gain it all back. It's the gradual trending towards fewer calories that will help out with people with sustaining or maintaining the weight.
Our review, Jim used the word balanced, and I think that's in our review of the evidence as part of the Bold Center, that's what really bubbled up to the top, is that balance, is a balanced nutrition. And the other thing I'll say is, the Mediterranean diet has some evidence behind it. There's also been a study that says, well, it really only works for people in the Mediterranean region because they're the ones who have done it their whole lives rather than starting at age 40. But my hang up about a particular diet is that we have to remember that we need to be culturally appropriate, and the Mediterranean diet doesn't work. There was a big study, the finger study in Finland. There was a multi-component risk study. They had a fish heavy diet. When now there are studies around the world replicating that. And when they got to the diet portion of the intervention, they're like, we can't use a fish-based diet in a lot of places of the world. So I think that word balanced is, from what we've seen of the evidence, is the key word.
Yeah. I would also add that you have to be practical. I mean, there are some diets that people just are never going to be able to orient to.
Right.
To the point about, coming from Mediterranean cultures, we've actually looked at the Mediterranean diet in Washington Heights. Where actually there are very few people from the Mediterranean region. There's actually Caribbean Hispanics actually orient mostly towards that dietary construct. And again, it's not to say that's the only one, but it's probably the most well studied.
Yeah.
And it is definitely the case that people who have that diet before they come into areas of highest risk of aging are the ones that have the lowest risk, especially if combined with regular exercise throughout lifetime. You're right that once somebody is at a high risk period, there's hardly any data to suggest that one diet over another has an advantage.
And I think your point about not highly processed foods, but foods that your grandmother would recognize. I think really make a difference.
Although my grandmother loved chocolate chip
Yeah,
cookies.
Fan too. Do we have any evidence or any thoughts about the use of cell phones and computers in terms of reducing risk, or perhaps even maybe increasing risk? What is that role? And I'd like Stephanie to talk about kind of how people have adjusted to virtual programming as opposed to early stage people needing to use technology, and how is that working? So either part of the
Two very
question
broad
first.
questions.
Yes.
I'll take the latter, but not the former.
I mean, I'll just say, I'm not aware of any data to suggest that, computer use or cell phone use it poses an increased risk. I will just say, however, that there was a lot of attention towards online gaming as a trick to help your brain process or, learn things or have a better memory. And there was a pretty clear demonstration that people get better at that game, but really nothing else. And so, to the point that Matt made earlier on about, making the time that you have on various activities, and I think Sarah said it as well, make those times count. You shouldn't have to go eat kale or do specific puzzles because you've been told. Make every moment of the day count. And if you really enjoy doing computer games, then okay, fine, have that as your moment of the day count. But it shouldn't be that you should have to do computer games.
I think that goes to one of your risk factors was sedentary, right? Being sedentary. So if a behavioral, something that you're doing from a behavioral standpoint, like gaming, makes your life more sedentary, then it's a secondary consequence of the game, and not necessarily a primary, or not secondary consequence of computer use versus it being a primary factor. As far as
Can I jump in just
Sure,
before you
sure,
talk
yeah.
about the second question? So I will say the one thing about Zoom, although I hate Zoom, I don't hate it, I'm just sick of it, right?
Tired of it.
But it can help you keep engaged socially with other people, particularly if you're in a situation where you're otherwise not. I mean, one of the things the Alzheimer's Association did at the very start, we got a grant from the state of Florida, and we actually bought and put programs on iPads and delivered them to nursing homes to keep people in that during the COVID socially engaged, being able to communicate with their families and whatnot. I'm not to say I'm not saying we did a big study on it. But I do think in terms of technology, that helps in a lot of situations, that social engagement aspect, which can be good. Social engagement is stepping more, a little more broadly than dementia, is been recognized by the CDC and others for a long time as important to healthy aging in
Right.
general. And there is some evidence that it's beneficial to.
So, you know, there's more evidence that social isolation is really deadly.
Yeah.
Being lonely.
And
Yes.
that's really a cue up for my answer to the question. So first, I'll give a shout out to a woman named Susan, who is living with dementia, who actually taught me how to use Zoom years before the pandemic hit. And
Right.
so people like Zoom early, I mean, if you look in Zoom's archives, you'll actually see an article about how people with dementia were using Zoom prior to it becoming
Huh.
popular. And I think precisely for the points that you're making here, what's the advantage of online programming? The advantage of online programming is people who would not otherwise be able to connect now can connect. So the probability of you being able to connect with someone who is more like you, even though they may live across the globe, you know, they may live across the country or across the globe, is greater. So that's a great thing. So increasing connection is great. And we're definitely finding that to be true. You know, it takes a little bit of a hurdle to get used to it, but I think, you know, the folks in this room who've been delivering CST virtually can definitely attest to you that they get over that hump pretty quickly. And it's much, you know, it's an incredible face-to-face experience. The flip side of that is, you know, there's a certain level of affluency that you need to have in order to be able to connect
True.
from a technology standpoint.
Yep.
And so that's another barrier that we need to, you know, from an equity standpoint, we actually need to level the playing field for access to virtual programming. I think the other piece that I'll just say is, you know, for some people with dementia, getting out into space is actually activating, and then coming into an in-person event is actually a good thing because they're revved up and it's like, I'm ready to go by the time I get here. For other people, that the transportation to get here completely has the opposite effect and will completely wipe them out. And so again, from my perspective, being able to offer both and for people to be able to opt into whatever makes sense to them is the best option. And, you know, I've been doing community-based services for a long time. So for me, the best delivered programs are embedded within the communities where people live. And so if I'd like to see, in an ideal world, we'd have virtual connections and we would have in-person connections at the closest proximity to where people are living. And that means we go to them instead of making them come to us.
I'll just add about our Arts and Minds experience. You know, we delivered over 1,000 programs all in person in 9 New York City museums before the pandemic hit. I requested Carolyn, who's our chief executive officer there in the back, Carolyn Halpin-Healy, that we close down Arts and Minds on March 6, 2020. And she agreed with me the next day after a very painful decision. And March 13th was the first day that we offered virtual programs. And we offered 400 virtual programs in the first 2 years of the pandemic, close to 500 now in English and Spanish. We delivered programs to Medellin, Colombia, using a Colombian educator in New York. And if you think about our enduring footprint for it, it's going to be a mix of both in-person and hybrid programs going forward. We're back in person now for our programs, but still offering hybrid. We've collaborated with partners in Australia. If you think about Australia, there are as many people in Australia as there are in Manhattan. And you know, you're trying to get everybody to go to an art museum. It's not practical. So you have to have some sort of enduring footprint, you know, striking that balance between access and the limitations of technology, but it has, I think, opened our eyes to what's potential.
Is
And
there,
I
can
Go
I
ahead,
just say
yes.
one thing? Is there a point in the Alzheimer or dementia journey that you cut off with the fact that you can really interact in any way with the screen?
I think it depends on the program and on the person. And
So even if it's advanced, somewhat.
I would say for our programs, it's never just one person who goes, it's a couple. So it's a care partner and a person with dementia, right? And so there's always somebody in
No,
that
I meant
couple who
I think
benefits.
actual
I have
person
seen
looking at the
that at a
screen.
certain point, people don't recognize that either family member who's trying to connect with them on FaceTime or on Zoom And that there depends upon the individual, and sometimes that ability stays longer than in others, and others it disappears a little bit earlier and they have trouble just focusing.
Right,
And certainly the mechanics of getting on it, you often need a family member or a helper to facilitate that.
or just, I meant you actually looking
Yeah,
at
I
the
think
screen.
they have, there is, my experience is that there are people who just can't at a certain point use a screen-based or a tablet-based program. Well, we could go on all night. I want to thank you all for an amazing amount of information, and I think hopeful information. You know, that we really are learning, and that there's this data that we are building on, this foundation that will really change the landscape in the future. We're getting there. I loved your slide, what happened between 2000 and now. I mean, that's really very impressive. So I just thank you all. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us from Washington. So much information. I also want to thank and acknowledge the Caring Kind staff, Linda and Julie, who's right here, our tech support, and Dominic and Ed and Meredith, who've been managing the questions for helping with tonight's program. And let me remind you that in order for us to do our work, you know, Caring Kind is 90% privately supported. We don't get a lot of money from the government. And only with the support of our friends and donors can we continue to do what we do and offer what we do free of charge to any individual who needs it. And although we're New York based and New York focused, we're actually much broader because of our virtual programs. We have people calling us from all over the world and people participating in all of our programs from all over. So we have some year-end letters, very gently placed on your chairs. And so if you're willing, you know, and would like to make a donation, we certainly would be very grateful, and thank you for your support. And I invite you all to keep in touch with us. If you're not on our newsletter subscription list, just go to the website caringkindnyc.org, and that's the first thing that pops up, and you'll get the newsletter on a regular basis. And Jamie will be in the lobby signing books in a moment, and want to join us in the bistro there for our our reception. Thank you all for coming. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving and a good holiday season, and hopefully we'll see you next year at our next one.
And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.
Appreciate that.